My true story from Oregon. They made me sleep in the basement storage room. Subscribe to Her Light for more stories of resilience and truth. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever felt dismissed by family who should have protected you? Let's build a community where every woman's voice matters and no one suffers in silence. At 68 years old, with silver hair that still held traces of the auburn it once was, and hands marked by decades of typing legal documents until my fingerprints had worn smooth on the tips, I never imagined I would be telling this story. My name is Margaret Elizabeth Harrison, and what happened to me in Salem, Oregon, during the brutal winter of 2023, changed everything I thought I knew about family, dignity, survival, and the quiet power that lives inside women who have been underestimated, dismissed, and discarded their entire lives. But before I tell you about the basement storage room that became my prison, before I describe the cold that seeped into my bones and the cruelty that nearly broke my spirit, I need you to understand who I was before they tried to erase me. I need you to know about the woman they thought they could destroy, because understanding my past makes my victory that much sweeter, and my message that much more important for every woman who has ever been told she doesn't matter anymore. I was born Margaret Elizabeth Cooper in 1955, the daughter of a mill worker and a seamstress who taught me that dignity wasn't something you were given. It was something you carried inside yourself regardless of circumstances. My mother, Ruth, used to say while hemming dresses late into the night by the light of a single lamp, her fingers moving with practiced precision over delicate fabrics, "Margaret, remember this. They can take your house, they can take your money, they can even take your health, but they can never take who you are unless you let them. Your worth isn't determined by what you own or how others treat you. It is determined by how you treat yourself and others, especially when times get hard." Those words would sustain me through the darkest period of my life. Though I didn't know it at the time, I thought my mother was just teaching me about general resilience, not preparing me for a battle I had fight in my 70s against my own child. I married Charles Harrison in 1978, a gentle man who sold insurance and believed that love meant partnership, not possession. He was the kind of man who brought me coffee in bed every morning for 40 years, who learned to braid hair when Jessica was little because he wanted to help with everything, who held my hand through 3 miscarriages before Jessica finally came along. We tried for children for 8 years before she arrived, a miracle baby who filled our small house with laughter and possibility, and hope for the future. Charles and I agreed that I would work to help support our family while also being the mother Jessica deserved. It meant sacrifice, working full-time at the law firm while managing homework and soccer practices and school plays, staying up late to help with science projects after spending all day typing legal briefs, using vacation days for parent-teacher conferences. But it was worth every exhausted moment, every missed lunch break, every evening spent juggling work and motherhood. For 35 years, from 1988 to 2023, I worked as a legal secretary at Morrison & Associates, one of Salem's most respected law firms. I wasn't just a secretary. I was the backbone of that office, the institutional memory, the person who knew where every document was filed, who remembered the details of cases from decades past, who could draft legal briefs that lawyers would sign without changing a word. I understood the rhythm of justice, the careful dance of evidence and argument that happened in courtrooms across America. I knew contracts like other people knew recipes. I understood rights and remedies, statutory requirements and filing deadlines, the intricate procedures that protected people from exploitation and abuse. I had seen everything in that job. Bitter divorces that destroyed families, custody battles that turned children into weapons, elder abuse cases that made my stomach turn with their casual cruelty. I had typed thousands of documents that protected people from exactly the kind of treatment I was about to experience myself. I had seen the patterns, recognized the warning signs, helped lawyers build cases that sent predators to prison, and restored dignity to victims who thought they had no voice. I had worked on cases where children stole from aging parents, where spouses abandoned partners when they became inconvenient, where trusted family members became the very people who caused the most harm. But somehow, when it was happening to me, I had convinced myself it was different. When Jessica suggested I move in with her and Derek after my mild heart attack 6 months ago, I had thought she meant it as family. When Dr. Chen said I shouldn't live alone anymore, given my cardiac condition and the isolation that had consumed me since Charles's death, I had believed Jessica's tears, her promises that she wanted to take care of me the way I had taken care of her. I had thought she meant love. I was catastrophically, dangerously wrong. The basement storage room measured exactly 8 feet by 10 feet. Smaller than most prison cells, as I would later learn when I researched the legal standards for humane confinement during my preparation for trial. I know the measurements precisely because I measured it myself, with a tape measure I found buried in one of the cardboard boxes that had become my roommates, my only companions in that concrete tomb beneath the house I had purchased for my daughter's happiness. The concrete floor was painted gray sometime in the 1980s, and that paint had long since begun to chip and peel, leaving little fragments that stuck to my socks when I walked barefoot to the makeshift bathroom area they had created for me in the corner. Behind a shower curtain they had hung from the ceiling pipes. The smell down there was musty and damp, a combination of old cardboard, mildew, and something else I couldn't identify. Something that smelled like decay, like things that had been left to rot in darkness and forgotten by the world above. It started on a rainy Tuesday in November, when my daughter Jessica cornered me in that cramped space where I had been sleeping for 5 nights that felt like 5 years. The rain outside drummed against the small, high windows that barely let in any light, and the constant dampness had seeped into my bones until even my breath seemed to fog in the cold air. My arthritis, which had been manageable for years with medication and gentle exercise, had flared into constant, grinding pain from sleeping on a thin camping mattress over concrete that never warmed. No matter how many blankets I piled on top of myself. Jessica stood in the doorway like a prison guard, her arms crossed over her designer sweater, the cream-colored cashmere one I had bought her for her birthday just 6 months earlier, when I still believed we were a normal family, who cared for each other, when I still thought the sacrifices I had made for 30 years meant something to her, when I still believed that raising a daughter with love and support would guarantee that love and support in return. Her husband Derek lurked behind her like a shadow with substance, wearing that particular smirk I had grown to recognize and despise over the past few months. It was the expression he wore whenever he thought he had gotten away with something. The same look he had had when he convinced Jessica to ask me for money to invest in his failed restaurant venture 2 years ago. Money I had never seen again. Money that had come from the savings account I had built penny by penny over 4 decades of careful living, skipped vacations, and second-hand clothes. "Listen, old woman." Jessica spat, her voice echoing off the bare concrete walls in a way that made each word sound sharper, more deliberately cruel. "This arrangement is temporary, but only if you prove you can handle it without complaining every 5 minutes about everything we do for you. We need our space upstairs. This family needs room to breathe without you hovering around every corner, commenting on everything we do, acting like you still have a say in how we live our lives in our own home." The irony of her calling it our own home when my money had made it possible wasn't lost on me. But I had learned over these past months of increasing isolation and control that speaking up only made things worse. They had strategies for making me pay for any resistance: cold meals served hours late, longer periods of banishment to the basement, forgetting to tell me when my doctor called, moving my medications to places I couldn't reach without asking for help. Derek stepped forward, his 6-foot frame filling the doorway and blocking what little light filtered down from upstairs. His voice carried that fake cheerfulness he used when he was being particularly cruel, the tone of a man who enjoyed having power over someone who couldn't fight back. "Think of it as character building, Margaret. If you can survive down here through the rainy season, maybe we will discuss other options, but honestly, at your age, you should be grateful. We are giving you any place at all. Most families would have shipped you off to some state. run facility by now let you become the government's problem, instead of dealing with all your needs and complaints? I sat there on the edge of the thin camping mattress they had provided, wearing my faded blue nightgown, the one with tiny flowers that Charles had bought me for our 35th wedding anniversary, just months before the cancer took him, and left me vulnerable to the very people who should have protected me. My gray hair was uncombed because they had moved my dresser and mirror upstairs to make room for Derek's elaborate computer setup, where he spent 12 hours a day playing video games and trading with money that used to be mine. My hands trembled as I folded them in my lap, but not from age or weakness or fear, from the slow burning realization that this had been their plan all along, that every kindness they had shown me since Charles died had been calculated, strategic, designed to position me exactly where I was now. Alone, dependent, isolated from friends and neighbors, and completely under their control. "We are doing this for your own good," Jessica continued, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she had learned from Derek, the voice she used when explaining why I couldn't have access to my own car keys, my own checkbook, my own phone calls. "You are not thinking clearly anymore, Mom. The heart attack affected your judgment. Dr. Chen said you need supervision, and this is us supervising. We are making sure you are safe, and not making dangerous decisions that could hurt you or us." Safe. The word rang hollow in that damp, cold space, where I was developing a cough that kept me awake at night, where the single space heater they had provided barely kept the temperature above 45 degrees. Where I was forbidden to come upstairs, except for brief bathroom breaks, and meal times they controlled like prison guards, managing an inmate's every movement. The house in Salem's Morningside neighborhood, a modest 3-bedroom ranch, with a 2-car garage, and a small garden that I had once imagined tending with my granddaughter Emma, had been my wedding gift to them 5 years ago. When Jessica married Derek in a ceremony that cost more than many people's annual salaries, a ceremony I would paid for with my retirement savings, because I wanted her day to be perfect, I had cashed out my entire 401k to help with the down payment on this house. I remembered standing in the real estate office, my hand shaking as I signed away my financial security, tears of joy streaming down my face as I told them, "Every family needs a foundation, and I want you to have the strongest one possible. This house is my gift to your future, to the grandchildren I hope to help you raise, to the life you are building together. I want you to always feel secure and loved in your own home." Now that foundation had become my prison, and the daughter I had raised to be strong and independent had become my jailer, complete with rules and punishments and threats disguised as concern for my welfare. The basement storage room had a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, the kind with a pull chain that reminded me of the apartment I had grown up in during the 1960s, when my family had very little, but somehow managed to maintain dignity and love for each other. There were no windows, except for 2 small rectangles high up near the ceiling that were more like slits than actual windows, designed for ventilation rather than light or any connection to the outside world. The walls were lined with metal shelving units, filled with cardboard boxes labeled in Jessica's neat handwriting, Christmas decorations, college textbooks, Derek's sports stuff, and the ones that broke my heart every time I looked at them, Mom's old stuff. Those boxes contained the remnants of my life with Charles, photo albums chronicling 40 years of marriage, love letters he had written me during his brief military service, souvenirs from trips we had taken to celebrate anniversaries and birthdays, the china set we had received as a wedding gift and used only on special occasions. Jessica had packed it all away within weeks of my moving in, claiming they needed the space, and that looking at reminders of my past life was preventing me from adjusting to my new situation. She had done it while I was at a doctor's appointment, so I came home to find 40 years of memories reduced to boxes labeled and stored like inventory in a warehouse. My entire history with the man I had loved relegated to the status of clutter. They had given me a camping chair with fraying fabric arms, the thin mattress that belonged to an old futon someone had donated to them years ago, and a space heater that barely worked and made alarming crackling sounds whenever I plugged it in. The bathroom was upstairs, which meant I had to climb 14 steps every time nature called, and I had to ask permission to use it during their family time. The hours between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. when they watched television, ate dinner, and lived their lives as if I didn't exist. During those forbidden hours, if I needed the bathroom, I had to knock on the door at the top of the stairs and wait for permission. Sometimes, they would make me wait 10 or 15 minutes before responding, and I would stand there in my nightgown, fighting the humiliation and the urgent need, knowing that my discomfort was part of their strategy to break my spirit. The first morning after Jessica's ultimatum, I woke before dawn to the sound of rain against the house, and the constant drip from a leaky pipe in the corner that Derek kept promising to fix, but never did. The dripping was like torture, a steady reminder that I was trapped in a space that wasn't even considered worthy of basic maintenance. Each drop seemed to count the seconds of my imprisonment, marking time in a place where time seemed to have stopped. There was a tray outside my door, cold oatmeal in a paper bowl with a plastic spoon, and lukewarm coffee in a styrofoam cup with my name written on it in black marker, like I was a patient in a hospital ward or a prisoner in a jail. The oatmeal was the instant kind, mixed with water instead of milk, without sugar or fruit or anything that might suggest they cared about my comfort or nutrition. I ate it anyway, because pride doesn't fill an empty stomach, and because I had learned during my years of working with lawyers that sometimes survival means accepting what you are given while you plan for something better. The coffee was bitter and weak, but it was warm, and warmth had become a precious commodity in my new reality. Later, I heard them laughing upstairs as they cooked bacon and eggs and pancakes, the smell drifting down through the heating vents to remind me of everything I was no longer allowed to share. I could hear the sizzling of butter in the pan, the clink of real silverware against real plates, the sound of Derek reading funny comments from his phone to Jessica, while she cooked their breakfast with ingredients I had paid for with my Social Security checks. The contrast was deliberate and cruel. While I sat in the cold basement eating instant oatmeal with a plastic spoon, they enjoyed a warm kitchen, hot food, real dishes, and each other's company. They wanted me to hear what I was missing, to understand exactly how far I had fallen in their estimation. That afternoon, while they were both out, Jessica at her yoga class and Derek at whatever job he was pretending to have that week, I crept upstairs like a thief in my own house and called my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Dr. Chen's mother had become a friend during my recovery from the heart attack, bringing me soup and staying to chat about her experiences immigrating from Taiwan and building a life in America against tremendous odds. Mrs. Chen was 73, sharp as a tack despite English being her second language, and had survived things that made my current situation look like a minor inconvenience. Her husband had died in a factory accident when her children were young, leaving her to raise 3 kids while working double shifts at a textile plant and going to English classes at night. She would put all 3 through college, watch them become successful professionals, and never once complained about the sacrifices she had made. "Margaret, dear," she said when I called her from Jessica's kitchen phone, speaking in the careful English she had perfected over 50 years in America, "this isn't care, it is cruelty. What they are doing to you, it is not legal. In this country, nobody has the right to treat you like this, not even family, especially not family. Have you documented anything? Do you have proof of how they are treating you?" I paused, looking around the kitchen that had once felt welcoming when I visited, but now felt foreign and hostile, noting how they had rearranged everything to suit their preferences, removing the step stool I needed to reach the higher cabinets, replacing my practical dishes with their expensive ones that I wasn't allowed to touch, installing a new coffee maker that was too complicated for me to use, another way of making me dependent on their goodwill for basic necessities. Documented. That word sparked something in my legal secretary brain, awakening skills I had used for decades, but had somehow forgotten to apply to my own situation. "Not yet," I whispered, glancing toward the window to make sure their car wasn't back in the driveway. "Start now," she advised, her voice firm but kind. "Write down everything. What they say, how they treat you, what they give you to eat, how cold it is down there. Take pictures if you can, and call me every day." I will be your witness. What they are doing, it is elder abuse, and there are laws against it. That evening, sitting on my camping chair in the dim light of the single bulb, surrounded by the boxes that contained my former life, I began keeping notes on my phone. Not dramatic or emotional entries like a diary, but factual, precise records like the case files I had maintained for 35 years. Times, temperatures, conversations, the condition of my food and living space. I photographed the storage room from multiple angles, the makeshift bed, the single light bulb, the boxes that surrounded me like walls of my past. I recorded the temperature readings from the small thermometer I had found in a box of Christmas decorations, readings that consistently showed the basement staying between 45 and 52 degrees, well below what any doctor would consider safe for someone recovering from a heart attack. I documented the meals they provided: instant oatmeal for breakfast, a sandwich with cheap lunch meat for lunch, and dinner that was usually leftovers from whatever they had cooked for themselves, served cold on paper plates. On the third night, lying on my thin mattress with 3 blankets piled on top of me and still shivering uncontrollably, I heard Jessica and Derek talking through the thin floor above my head. Their voices carried down through the heating ducts, and I realized that the positioning of my room had been chosen specifically because they could have private conversations without worrying about neighbors overhearing. Not realizing that the same heating system that failed to warm my space also carried their words directly to me. "How long do we have to keep this up?" Derek was saying, his voice carrying the whining tone he used whenever he was frustrated about not getting his way immediately. "She is tougher than we thought. I figured a week of this, and she would be begging us to find her a nursing home so we could get on with our lives." Jessica's laugh was bitter, lacking any trace of the warmth I remembered from her childhood, from the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and tell me I was the bravest person in the world. "Mom's always been stubborn. But the lawyer said, if we can prove she is not capable of independent living, we can get conservatorship. Then the house is legally ours, along with whatever's left in her accounts. We just have to document that she is making poor decisions about her own care." My blood ran cold as the implications sank in. Conservatorship. I knew exactly what that meant from my years at the law firm. They would have complete control over my finances, my medical decisions, every aspect of my life. I had seen it happen to other elderly clients, watched as predatory family members used the legal system to strip away independence and dignity from people who had trusted them with everything. Derek's voice grew louder, more animated, as he warmed to his subject. "What if she gets sick down there? What if she dies? Will not that complicate things legally? I don't want this coming back on us. Then our problems are solved," Jessica replied with a matter-of-factness that made my stomach turn and my heart race with terror. "Natural causes. Old woman, weak heart, couldn't handle the stress of moving. The death certificate would read cardiac event brought on by pre-existing conditions. Who is going to question it? And if she dies, the house transfers to me immediately, as the surviving beneficiary, plus whatever's left in her accounts. No waiting for probate, no legal complications." I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heart race, not from my cardiac condition, but from pure, undiluted fury mixed with fear. These people, my own daughter, and the man I had welcomed into our family with open arms and open checkbook, were literally planning my death while I lay shivering directly beneath them. They weren't just neglecting me, they were actively creating conditions they hoped would kill me while maintaining plausible deniability. "The beauty of it is," Derek continued, his voice taking on an excited edge that made my skin crawl, "she is choosing to stay down there. We are not forcing her. We are just not offering alternatives that she would find acceptable. When the authorities investigate, if they investigate, we will be the loving family who tried to care for a confused old woman who refused help and made poor decisions about her living situation." The next morning, while they slept late as they always did, I made a decision that would change everything. My hands shaking with anger rather than fear, I called Eleanor Santos, my former boss at Morrison and Associates. Eleanor had retired as senior partner 2 years ago after 40 years of practicing family law. But we had maintained a friendship built on mutual respect and shared memories of fighting for justice in a profession that hadn't always welcomed women with open arms. Eleanor had started as a secretary herself in the 1970s, working her way through law school at night, while raising 2 children as a single mother and dealing with professors and employers who thought women had no place in law. She understood what it meant to be underestimated, to have your intelligence questioned, to fight for every ounce of respect you earned. When she became a lawyer, she made it her mission to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, and she had never lost a case involving elder abuse. Margaret, Eleanor's voice was warm, but immediately concerned when she heard my whispered greeting. "How are you feeling, dear? I have been thinking about you since Charles's funeral. Are you settling in well with Jessica and Derek? I know transitions can be difficult, especially after such a loss." I told her everything: the storage room, the cold, the inadequate food, the conversations I would overheard, the conservatorship plan, the casual discussions of my potential death. Eleanor listened without interruption. And when I finished, there was a long pause that stretched until I wondered if the call had been disconnected. "Margaret," she said finally, her voice taking on the steel tone I remembered from her courtroom appearances. "Do you remember the Harrington case from 2019? The elderly gentleman whose son tried to force him into a nursing home to access his property?" I remembered it vividly. We had worked for months gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, building a case that proved financial exploitation and elder abuse. Mr. Harrington had been living in his son's garage, told it was temporary while repairs were being made to his room. The repairs never happened, and the son was systematically draining his father's accounts while creating documentation to support an incompetency filing. "You want me to fight this legally?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "I want you to survive this, and then I want you to teach them a lesson they will never forget," Eleanor replied firmly. "But first, we need evidence, real evidence. Documentation that will hold up in court and leave no room for their lawyers to claim this was all a misunderstanding or a family disagreement." Eleanor connected me with investigator Tom Rodriguez, a former police detective who specialized in elder abuse cases and financial exploitation. Tom had seen everything in his 20 years with the Salem Police Department. But he told me later that my case was one of the most calculated and cruel he had ever encountered. Within 24 hours, he had provided me with a tiny recording device, no bigger than a button, along with detailed instructions on how to use it safely and effectively. He also gave me a prepaid cell phone so I could communicate without Jessica and Derek monitoring my calls. "Wear this," he instructed during our brief meeting at a downtown coffee shop, where I had told Jessica I was seeing Dr. Chen for a follow-up appointment. "Record everything: conversations, their treatment of you, their discussions about your future. But be extremely careful. If they suspect what you are doing, things could get dangerous. People who are capable of what they are doing to you will not hesitate to escalate. If they feel threatened." I started wearing the device every day, pinned inside my cardigan where it was invisible. Within a week, I had hours of recorded conversations that painted a picture of systematic abuse and exploitation that was even worse than I had realized. Jessica and Derek discussed their timeline for getting conservatorship, their plans for selling my belongings, their casual cruelty about my living conditions, and their hopes that I would die before they had to go through the legal process. But the recordings also revealed something else. They were stealing from me actively, not just planning to inherit my money. Derek had been using my Social Security direct deposit to pay their mortgage, their utilities, their credit card bills. Jessica had been forging my signature on checks and using my debit card for her personal expenses. They had been systematically draining my accounts for months while keeping me isolated so I couldn't discover what they were doing. The most damning recording came during a dinner party they hosted for Derek's coworkers from the tech company where he claimed to work. I could hear everything through the heating ducts as they entertained upstairs, while I sat alone in the basement with a bologna sandwich and water. listening to them laugh and drink wine that cost more than my weekly food allowance. "Where is your mother tonight?" someone asked Jessica during a lull in conversation. "Oh, she is resting downstairs," Jessica replied smoothly, her voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who had rehearsed this lie. "She prefers the quiet down there. Much better for her heart condition. The doctor said she needs to avoid stress and excitement." Derek added with a laugh that made my skin crawl. "We have set up a lovely little space for her, very cozy and private. Though between you and me, I think she is starting to lose it a bit mentally. Yesterday she accused us of stealing from her accounts. Paranoia. You know how it is with older folks. The heart attack affected her judgment." The whole table murmured sympathetically, while I sat in my lovely little space, documenting their lies and feeling my fury build into something powerful and dangerous. They were using my illness, my vulnerability, my isolation to create a narrative that would justify anything they did to me. But the recording that sealed their fate came 2 weeks later, when they thought I was napping but I was actually lying still on my mattress. Recording device activated, listening to Derek pace the kitchen above my head while talking loudly on the phone. "Trust me. It is working perfectly," he was saying to whoever was on the other end. "A few more weeks of this, and any doctor will agree she is incompetent. The living conditions alone prove she cannot make rational decisions about her care. Hell, what sane person would choose to live in a basement storage room if they were thinking clearly?" He paused, listening to the other person, then continued with growing excitement. "The beauty is, it is all her choice. We are not forcing her to stay down there. We are just not offering alternatives that someone in her mental state would find acceptable. When the conservatorship hearing happens, we will be the loving family who tried to care for a confused old woman who refused reasonable help." Another pause. Then Derek's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that the recording device caught perfectly. "And if she doesn't make it through the winter, well, that solves all our problems permanently. Old people die from heart attacks all the time, especially when they are living in stressful conditions because of their own poor judgment." That afternoon, my hands steady with purpose. For the first time in months, I called Eleanor. "I have what we need," I said simply. "Good," she replied, "because tomorrow we are going to war." Eleanor worked through the night, preparing our case, calling in favors from judges and prosecutors she had worked with for decades. By morning, we had filed a petition for emergency protective services, along with a motion to freeze any financial accounts or property transfers involving my name. We included the recordings, the photographs, the temperature logs, Mrs. Chen's witness statement, and a comprehensive medical evaluation from Dr. Chen confirming that I was mentally and physically capable of independent living. Judge Martinez, who had known Eleanor for 20 years and trusted her judgment implicitly, reviewed our filing within hours. By noon, the restraining order was approved, and by 2 p.m., law enforcement was prepared to execute it. At exactly 3 p.m., while Jessica was at her yoga class and Derek was supposedly at work, but actually meeting with their lawyer about how to expedite the conservatorship process, I walked upstairs for the last time as a prisoner in my own home and began packing my belongings. Not everything, just enough to last a few weeks. Eleanor had arranged for me to stay at a transitional housing facility for seniors while the legal proceedings played out. I left the restraining order on their kitchen counter, along with a note written in my careful secretary's handwriting. "Effective immediately, you are prohibited from accessing my financial accounts, making medical decisions on my behalf, or claiming authority over my living arrangements. The basement storage room is no longer my residence, and this house is no longer my home. All financial transactions using my accounts or credit are hereby revoked and will be prosecuted as theft." Margaret Elizabeth Harrison. At 3:45 p.m., just as I was loading my suitcase into Eleanor's car with the help of Tom Rodriguez and a victim's advocate, Jessica's SUV pulled into the driveway with Derek's truck right behind it. They had been called by their lawyer, who had been notified of the court filings as required by law. Jessica got out slowly, reading the papers I had left behind, her face shifting from confusion to disbelief to rage in the span of 30 seconds. Derek emerged from his truck, looking like a man who had just realized his lottery ticket was fake. "Mom," Jessica shouted across the yard, her voice cracking with panic. "What is this? What have you done? Are you having some kind of breakdown?" I turned to face her, standing straighter than I had in months, my voice steady and clear, despite my racing heart. "I have remembered who I am," I said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, loud enough for there to be witnesses. "I am not your burden, I am not your victim, and I am not your path to easy money. I am a woman who knows her worth and her rights, and I am reclaiming both." Derek came running across the lawn, the restraining order crumpled in his fist, his face red with fury and fear. "You cannot do this. We are your family. We have been taking care of you, family," I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter and poisonous. Family doesn't warehouse their elders in storage rooms. Family doesn't steal from people who trust them. Family doesn't plan funeral arrangements while the person is still alive to hear them discuss it. Jessica's face went pale as the implications hit her. "You were listening. You were spying on us." "I was learning," I corrected, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Learning exactly who you really are. Learning that the daughter I raised to be strong and independent became someone who preys on the vulnerable. Learning that my own child was willing to kill me slowly for money." The police arrived. Then Eleanor had called them as a precaution, knowing that people cornered by their own crimes can become desperate and dangerous. Officer Stevens was respectful but firm as he explained the terms of the restraining order to Jessica and Derek, who stood in their driveway looking like criminals caught in the act, which is exactly what they were. "No contact for 30 days minimum." Officer Stevens explained, "No access to Mrs. Harrison's accounts. No attempts to interfere with her housing or medical care. No communication of any kind. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and prosecution." As we drove away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not happiness yet, but the deep, quiet hope that comes from knowing you have stopped accepting what you don't deserve and started fighting for what you do. The legal battle took 4 months and became one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases prosecuted in Oregon that year. Jessica and Derek hired expensive attorneys who tried to paint me as a confused old woman who had been manipulated by outsiders into filing false claims. They brought in their own doctors who suggested my heart condition was affecting my judgment and that my accusations were symptoms of medication-induced paranoia. But Eleanor was absolutely brilliant. She let my recordings speak for themselves, playing them in court with such devastating effect that several jurors visibly recoiled when they heard Derek discuss my potential death as a solution to their problems. She had Mrs. Chen testify about our conversations and her observations of my mental state. She brought in Tom Rodriguez to explain his findings and the systematic nature of the financial exploitation. Most importantly, she put me on the stand and let me tell my story in my own words. Clearly, calmly, with the precision and attention to detail that had made me valuable as a legal secretary for 3 decades, I spoke for 2 hours, describing not just what they had done to me, but why they had done it, how they had planned it, and what they had hoped to gain from my suffering. Mrs. Harrison, the opposing attorney, asked during cross-examination, trying to salvage something from their crumbling case, "Isn't it possible that your daughter and son-in-law were simply trying to provide you with a safe living environment according to their best understanding of your needs?" I looked directly at the jury, these 12 strangers who held my future in their hands, and spoke with the authority of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms and understood exactly how justice worked. "Sir, I have typed up dozens of elder abuse cases over the years. I know the difference between safety and imprisonment, between care and control, between protection and exploitation. Safety includes heat, privacy, dignity, and respect. What they provided was isolation, cold, humiliation, and a systematic plan to strip me of my independence while stealing my money. That is not safety. That is calculated cruelty with a profit motive. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts: elder abuse, financial exploitation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge awarded me full control of my finances, plus $50,000 in damages for pain and suffering. More importantly, Jessica and Derek were ordered to have no contact with me for 2 years. Derek was required to complete 200 hours of community